Every Kirby game I've ever played is good. You might be asking what makes Kirby games so good. It's a pretty simple formula. Basically, you just have simple 2D platforming, mildly decent level design, the simple Kirby abilities to float to cheese platforming, inhale enemies, and exhale to do damage, and, of course, the option to use the abilities of enemies you inhaled, which generally have their own massive set of possible moves to use, which drastically change how you play through the game. That's also packed with pretty unique and fun boss fights, and normally some simple minigames you can play for a few minutes to take a break from the story or even play with some friends. And obviously some pretty banger music. Like, every Kirby game ever made has an absolutely killer soundtrack. Anyway, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with Kirby Superstar Ultra? Or not, I don't really know what you're thinking. Either way, as the title suggests, Kirby Superstar Ultra is the ultimate version of this formula. The game is packed to the brim with a ton of my favorite copy abilities, a ton of different stages to play through, but most importantly, just a ton of high quality content. I mean, just take a second to look at this menu. Most of these tiny little options on the billboard here will give you between 1 to 3 hours of playtime on a casual run, even just the simple side minigames. This game also lets you play with a friend, similar to other Kirby games, by allowing them to control a little helper version of a copy ability that you spit out, which oftentimes have slightly varied movesets that are more similar to what the enemy you inhaled could do, rather than what you actually get as an ability for Kirby. Despite this game being on the Nintendo DS, which is known for frequent disconnects when playing multiplayer, I was able to play through this game in around 10 to 12 hours with a friend, with only 2 total disconnects, which is absolutely insane, but didn't matter much since this game has a lot of places to save, and overall it was still very fun. Anyway, back to the point, this game has a bunch of copy abilities, which you can see when you go to playing the arena, which is a boss rush mode, where you can see that there's quite a variety, which are all fun to use in their own right, and can give different playthroughs of the same stages a whole different feel, which you can actually experience in this game, unlike a handful of other Kirby games where you often can't pass certain parts of a level without using certain copy abilities. As far as I can remember, you can basically play through every single level in whatever creative way you want, to the point that I'm pretty sure this game is fully beatable with no abilities, without needing to bypass any in-game hurdles that try to stop you from doing that. That being said, I'm not sure why you would do that, as this game has some of my personal favorite abilities, like Ice, Bird, Hammer, Bomb, and Parasol, and some unique abilities like Fighter, Paint, and Copy. That's just the abilities though, which would mean nothing if the rest of this game wasn't great. This game has some phenomenal boss fights which are extremely fun, such as Galacta Knight, Marx, King DDD, Camelio Arm, Fatty Whale, a computer virus, and a really funny reoccurring boss fight against Bandana Waddle Dee, who literally does nothing but walk. Honestly, all of the bosses in this game were absolutely phenomenal to fight against and offer their own unique experiences and flavor of gaming. For example, in my personal favorite boss fight from this game against the computer virus, you literally battle in an RPG type fashion where you take turns hitting and defending, which I honestly just really like the aesthetic of. There's also the fight against Fatty Whale, where you fight a goofy looking whale who just does some funny attacks going from one side of the screen to the other. Then there's the Camelio fight, where you absorb some glowing balls the chameleon spits out to defeat him with his own ability that he uses for camouflage. Or the King Deity fight, where you're just locked in a cage with him as he swings his hammer around like a madman. And there's the fight against Cabula, in which you play more of a side-scroller bullet hell instead of your classic 2D Kirby, and obviously you have your final boss fight, which is harder than pretty much any fight prior in the game against an evil entity drunk on power, as you will find in every Kirby game ever made. I could go on and on explaining the many bosses in this game and what I liked about them, but I don't want to make this video too long, and I feel like I already got the point across. That point being, of course, that every single boss in this game is completely unique from pretty much every other thing in this game, oftentimes even changing up the type of game you're playing away from the 2D platformer core. That being said, this game doesn't just have amazing copy abilities and bosses, it also has some really fun side modes. There's the returning Arena mode, which, as I said before, is just a simple boss rush, but after beating it, you unlock the true Arena, which lets you fight harder bosses and the hidden true hardest boss of this game. The campaign modes available are also pretty fun and varied, being Spring Breeze, Dynablade, the Great Cave Offensive, Revenge of Meta Knight, Milky Way Wishes, Revenge of the King, Meta Nightmare Ultra, and Helper or Hero. Each of those things I listed has their own levels, stories, bosses, pre-rendered cutscenes that play in obscenely low resolution for no real reason. Like, really? Why does this only use like 60% of the top of the S-screen? And sometimes even their own special mechanics, such as Meta Nightmare, in which you play as Meta Knight and antagonist one of the other stories, or Helper or Hero, where you play as a specific helper instead of Kirby and get to use the alternative moveset normally reserved for player 2 to play through the story. I definitely can't go into detail about even one of these stages, as going in depth about just one of these modes could easily be its own entire video, but just know the different stories are very entertaining, either by being very goofy, very interesting, very fun to play through, or a mix of those three, while also being nothing like any of the other stories available here. This is an insane amount of content, and while I said I completed it in around 10 hours, that was honestly sort of a speedrun of the game as I played it many times before, and I could easily see the story modes alone being 20 plus hours of content if you've never played this game before and try to experience everything it offers. On top of the insane quantity and quality offered from these stories, you also have the extra, more minigame-like modes. First off, there's Gourmet Race, where you race King Deity to the finish line on 3 stages, while also trying to collect extra food in the stages to earn more points. This mode is very simple, fun platforming, and even has a time trial mode, making it really fun to compete with friends on. Then there's the actual minigames. We have Samurai Kirby, which is a reaction time based game where you try to react to a signal before your opponent, which is extremely hard, even at the lowest difficulty. We have Megaton Punch, which is a simple game where you just time 3 different things to try and get the deepest punch. This game is pretty easy, especially compared to Samurai Kirby, but can be pretty fun to do as a break in between parts of the stories or as a reward for completing them. Then there's the multiplayer minigames. Kirby's Card Swipe is a simple game where you just need to swipe a specific card from a few different cards laid out on your screen before your opponent does when it's revealed, which can lead to some nail-biting rounds with friends. Kirby on the Draw, on the other hand, is a pretty simple minigame where you just want to shoot the bad guys before your opponents by tapping them on the screen, but avoid shooting the good guys or running out of ammo at the wrong time, making you actually have to think a bit about where you shoot as you try to outscore your opponents. Then there's by far the best multiplayer minigame, Snack Tracks, where food comes down a conveyor belt, but there's also sometimes bad things like rocks, bugs, and bombs, which you can either break or send to your opponent's conveyor belts to put them out of action for a while if they slip up. What makes this so fun is that the conveyor belts just keep getting faster and faster while you have to make sure to destroy all the bad things coming your way, which can easily pile up since any bombs you tap get sent to someone else's conveyor belt, effectively sabotaging them. But yeah, that's just a simple rundown of the many things this game has to offer, which I hope I've made abundantly clear is a lot. There's tons of variety and simplicity of this game on top of just an absolute boatload of content and some of the best music and bosses found throughout all of Kirby, or honestly just gaming in general, which all follows the Kirby formula to a T. Even for a Kirby game, this game is absolutely insane, especially if you can find it for less than or near its initial $60 price at release. While I still haven't played a lot of the Kirby franchise, this is hands down my favorite game in the series, and this is in all honesty probably one of the best games ever made, especially when it comes to single player content. I honestly couldn't find any real flaws to this game, as it's very easy or hard depending on how you personally decide to play it, meaning difficulty is no problem, and every single thing I list in this video is a very complete and extremely enjoyable experience, to the point that I could see a lot of the different options here retailing as their own games and still being well worth the money. I think it'll be really hard for HAL Labs or whoever ends up picking Kirby up down the line to top this absolute masterpiece, even though the Kirby franchise is known for only ever making absolute banger games without a single miss to my knowledge in the mainline franchise up to this point. Basically, this is the quintessential Kirby game, and I don't think there's a single person on this planet who could play through this game and not enjoy it. Overall, this is the first ever video game I've reviewed on this channel that deserves the coveted 6 out of 5. Also, big thanks to Matt for being the first ever channel patron of Sizzyl.